For the first time in this war, the most dangerous battlefield is no longer in eastern Ukraine. It is in the promises being made in European capitals. When Britain and France prepare to send troops into Ukraine after a peace deal, this is not peacekeeping as we have known it. It is deterrence without borders, security without certainty, and a gamble that ambiguity can prevent the next war rather than invite it. I want you to think about that. Foreign soldiers stationed not to fight a war, but to stop the next one. A ceasefire monitored by the United States, yet defended by Europeans. And a peace agreement where the hardest question land remains unanswered. History tells us wars rarely end when guns fall silent. They end when power, fear, and fatigue briefly align. If you think this agreement sounds reassuring, you may be missing what makes it so risky and so transformative. Because to understand why Europe is doing this now, we must first understand the problem this deal is desperately trying to contain. What then is the real problem this agreement is trying to solve? It is not simply how to end this war. It is how to prevent the next one without triggering it first. Ukraine and its allies face a paradox. A ceasefire without protection invites a future invasion. But protection without clarity risks escalation. Somewhere between those two dangers sits this proposal. Foreign troops deployed only after peace, security guarantees strong enough to deter, yet ambiguous enough to avoid direct confrontation with Russia. This is why the language matters. Not guarantees, but protocols. Not automatic defense, but monitoring. Not victory, but durability. Every word is chosen to leave room for Washington, for Europe, and for Moscow. At the center of it all is Ukraine, exhausted but unbroken, asked to trust that this time promises will hold. And hovering above every discussion is the question no one wants to answer first: where the war actually stops on the map. To understand how this dilemma emerged, we have to step back into the origins, the timing, and the pressures that made this moment inevitable. To see how we arrived here, we have to look at the forces that shaped this war long before today's negotiations. This conflict did not evolve in a straight line. It moved in cycles: escalation, exhaustion, adaptation. Russia advanced, Ukraine resisted, allies supplied weapons, and each side recalculated its limits. Over time, territory became less than just land. It became leverage. About 1/5 of Ukraine fell under Russian control, and with it came a strategic stalemate neither side could easily break. As months turned into years, the costs accumulated unevenly. Ukraine paid in cities, infrastructure, and lives. Russia paid in sanctions, isolation, and a grinding military effort that advanced slowly but relentlessly. Neither side achieved a decisive outcome. What emerged instead was attrition as a strategy. This is where diplomacy re-enters, not because the war is resolved, but because the system around it is straining. Winter warfare looms, populations grow weary, allies seek an end that looks like stability, not surrender. And so the focus shifts from winning territory to freezing risk. That shift sets the stage for the first crisis moment, when theory collides with reality. The first real crisis arrives the moment peace is discussed before it is ever signed. Russia makes its position clear. Any foreign troops on Ukrainian soil are a legitimate target. It is not a threat whispered behind closed doors. It is stated openly, meant to test resolve. And suddenly, deterrence becomes exposure. At the same time, allies gather in Paris and speak of progress. Declarations are signed, legal frameworks are outlined, military hubs are imagined across Ukraine. On paper, it looks orderly. In reality, it is a high-wire act, because this is the moment where intent meets perception. Europe says these forces are defensive. Moscow hears something else: permanence, encirclement, a line crossed. Notice what is missing. No agreement on territory. No clarity on where a ceasefire line would run. The most explosive variable is deliberately postponed. And yet, momentum builds. Leaders call this a milestone, a huge step forward. Not because the risks are gone, but because the alternative is another winter of attrition that Ukraine can least afford. If this sounds like progress, ask yourself what kind of peace begins with mutual suspicion fully intact. Because once troops are promised, even conditionally, there is no easy way back. And that leads us to what truly drives this strategy, the machinery beneath the diplomacy. Beneath the speeches and declarations lies a quieter logic, one that rarely makes headlines. This plan is built on managed ambiguity. Foreign troops would not arrive as automatic defenders. They would arrive as signals. Their presence is meant to raise the cost of renewed aggression without formally redrawing alliances or triggering direct war between great powers. That is why the United States appears in the background, not the foreground. Washington monitors, Europe deploys. Responsibility is distributed, not centralized. It is deterrence by diffusion. Equally important is what these forces would do: secure skies and seas, regenerate Ukraine's armed forces, stabilize, not advance. The goal is not to defeat Russia militarily, but to make the peace too expensive to break. This is why territory remains unresolved. Fixing borders freezes the conflict in law. Leaving them undefined freezes it in practice. Both sides calculate which kind of uncertainty they can tolerate. What emerges is a system designed less for justice than for endurance. Not a clean end, but a controlled pause. And systems like this do not fail loudly at first. They strain quietly until the next shock arrives. Which brings us to the second crisis, where pressure does not come from diplomacy, but from time itself. The second crisis does not explode, it tightens. Winter returns. Fighting continues. Cities are still struck. Infrastructure still strains. And while diplomats speak of peace being almost ready, the war keeps demanding payment in the present tense. This is where time becomes the enemy. Ukraine faces another season of attritional warfare, one that drains resources faster than it shifts the front line. Every delay raises the cost of holding on. Every concession risks political fracture at home. Peace may be close, but survival must last long enough to reach it. At the same moment, pressure builds on the other side. Russia's advance remains slow, objectives are incomplete. Yet halting now means accepting foreign forces near territory it claims, and a future shaped by others. Moving forward risks deeper isolation. This is the bind. Both sides feel compelled to act, yet constrained from acting decisively. The system narrows choices until compromise looks less like weakness and more like exhaustion management. Crisis here is not a single event. It is the realization that time no longer favors anyone. And when time turns against strategy, the consequences fall first on those with the least control. That is where this story turns from states and systems to people. For the people of Ukraine, the abstract debates of capitals are anything but abstract. Every city still under fire, every bridge or power plant damaged, every family displaced. These are the human costs of delays in diplomacy. When leaders speak of security guarantees or protocols, the meaning is filtered through exhaustion and fear. You, the citizens, are asked to trust that words on paper will shield your lives tomorrow, and trust is hard-earned. The winter is harsh. Food, heat, and hope are scarce. Yet, at the same time, promises of multinational forces and weapons support offer a fragile lifeline. They whisper that the war may end not in surrender, but in a framework designed to prevent its return. This is why these guarantees matter emotionally, strategically, morally. They are the bridge between survival and peace, between doubt and belief. And this is where a well-timed decision can either inspire confidence or fracture resolve entirely. Because when the war touches home, every calculation of strategy, diplomacy, and deterrence becomes intensely personal. The ripple of Ukraine's conflict extends far beyond its borders. Every decision made in Paris, London, or Washington sends tremors across Europe and the wider world. Neighboring states watch, calculating their own security. NATO monitors closely, balancing solidarity with caution. Even nations far from Kyiv consider what precedent this sets. Foreign troops deployed conditionally, guarantees enforced selectively, and sovereignty negotiated under fire. The world's economy, already strained, braces for the indirect effects. Energy flows, trade routes, and global markets respond to every announcement, every warning, every silence from Moscow. Geopolitical fault lines shift, not with armies alone, but with the perception of commitment or the lack of it. And yet, despite these pressures, the logic of deterrence holds. Visible commitment can prevent invisible disaster. This is the quiet calculation underpinning alliances and declarations, shaping a war that at first glance seems confined but is anything but. Because as we look ahead, the war in Ukraine is a test not just for the nation itself, but for the resilience and credibility of the global system. Looking forward, three paths emerge for Ukraine and for Europe. The first, the optimistic scenario, a peace deal fully implemented. Foreign troops arrive, ceasefire lines are respected, and reconstruction begins. Kyiv retains sovereignty, allies maintain credibility, and Europe stabilizes. The war ends not with triumph, but with durable prevention. The second, a middle scenario, partial implementation. Some guarantees hold, some fail. Troops are deployed unevenly. Territory remains contested. Ukraine survives, but the population remains wary of promises that may falter. The war may not resume immediately, but instability lingers, leaving questions about the cost of endurance. The third, the worst scenario, breakdown. Moscow refuses compromise. Ceasefire collapses. Promises fail. Winter fatigue turns into renewed attrition. The war continues, claiming more lives, eroding confidence in alliances, and challenging the notion that diplomacy can contain aggression. These are not mere hypotheticals. They are the logical consequences of the choices made and the compromises avoided today. And as the world watches, one question remains: which future will we choose, and at what cost? As we draw this moment into focus, one insight becomes unavoidable. Peace is never simply the absence of war. It is the architecture we build to prevent its return. The guarantees we make, the troops we deploy, the compromises we endure, the clarity we demand, and the ambiguities we accept. Ukraine's future, Europe's security, and even the credibility of global alliances hang in the balance, shaped by agreements still on paper and promises still untested. For you, watching from anywhere in the world, the lesson is clear. Wars are not just fought on front lines. They are fought in negotiations, in legal frameworks, in the careful calibration of risk and trust. The people who survive, the nations that endure, are those who understand this tension and act decisively within it. So watch closely, understand deeply, because the next moves in Ukraine will ripple far beyond its borders. And the decisions made today will define not only who controls territory, but who controls the future of peace itself. If you found this analysis illuminating, share it, discuss it, and stay engaged, because understanding is the first step towards shaping a world where war no longer dictates terms.